welcome back to another episode of Not Done. I'm Sloan Dean, and today I'm sitting down with a good friend, Julienne Smith, newly appointed head of America's growth at Hyatt. She is responsible for expanding Hyatt's brand portfolio across North America, Latin America, and the Caribbean, where you've seen Hyatt very active in the last couple of years. She also comes with an extensive background in hotels, working for Marriott, having a prior tour of duty at Hyatt for 14 years, and most recently running development for IHG in the Americas. So welcome to Not Done. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. And as it says, I'm not done. So here I am.
Well, give us the 2 minute version. You all are a Boston University liberal arts grad. How does a BU liberal arts grad all of a sudden spend her entire career in hotel development?
Man, that is a crazy, squiggly, as they say, journey. I graduated just a couple years before the dot-com crash.
Yep.
And I was living in New York. I was working for HarperCollins in publicity. I did some cool book tours. The Rock, before he became The Rock, he wrote, "Can you smell what The Rock is cooking?" And I worked on his book tour. It's kind of funny because he needed security for his Barnes and Noble book tour. And my husband, my boyfriend at the time, husband now, and I were like, okay, well, we'll work this book tour. And there's some people who are going up for autographs because he was known in the WWF wrestling world, but he was not who he is today. But that's sort of like our brush with fame.
Very
But there's no money in publishing, okay? So all of my friends were making so much in the dot-com world. So I moved out to Northern California, chased a dot-com job. That blew up, but I was out there. So I was working in restaurants. I had a regular customer who was in sales for a construction company, needed an assistant. I thought construction sounded terrible, but I needed a job. And then I loved it. And it was really cool to learn about how they handled all the Washington Mutual banks at the time on the West Coast. And I was the logistics coordinator at one point. And I just got real interested in real estate development out of that. This was pre-mortgage crisis, so everybody in California was buying homes. All my bartender friends were mortgage brokers also. Crazy time. But my grandmother was an executive in the 1950s, which for, women weren't common. She was a New Yorker. She worked for Hearst magazine. And she told my siblings and I that if we wanted to do something career-wise, to find a company that did that and then take any role. So I had that advice in mind, and when real estate development became known to me, because I didn't study it, wasn't aware that, Mr. Sheraton or Mr. Marriott didn't own all the hotels. I had no idea. I started looking for roles in real estate development in big companies. 2 jobs were available. One was at Marriott in their West Coast development office. They were doing corporate development at the time. And one was with Yum Brands in Irvine. And Marriott called me back. Actually, I hounded them. And the admin assistant for Chris Ivey, who hired me, I know you know him, said, "Will you please interview this woman? She's driving me crazy." So he interviewed me. I was actually overqualified per his standards. They hired somebody else. It was a development assistant role. They hired somebody else. She didn't work out. They called me 6 weeks later, and I got the role. And it was actually part-time at first, but I got to work for Tony at that time, Joy Berry, who you might know,
Yes.
who did the corporate development in the West Coast office. And, I fell in love with the business, and here I am.
It happens. I always tell people I was an industrial systems engineering grad from Georgia Tech, so there in your home city, and I wanted to get back to Atlanta from Chicago, and I had a job offer at Home Depot and IHG, the Corporate Americas office, and I just thought hotels sounded like more fun. And you're right. I never thought of myself as a hotel CEO. It just kind of gets in your blood, and the people are amazing. It's a fun business. It just kind
Totally.
of happens.
It's a happy business, right? I mean, people
Right.
want to be in hotels for the most part. So I find it to be just a really great group of people and very exciting. I'm someone who likes to travel. I'm not someone who's in the office 5 days a week. That doesn't sound fun to me. So being out and about is really what I enjoy.
Yeah, so then I think you and I met when what you mentioned Chris Ivey. I was a VP of development at Interstate, and you were
Yes.
and then get SVP at Hyatt, and you were growing Hyatt Place and Hyatt House as or Hilton moved into select service, which, looking back on, they're huge brands now, but they were kind of incubated. You did have the AmeriSuite still that accelerated Hyatt Place, but how was that as you kind of incubated a brand? Because Hyatt was really only known at the time for full service. And then all of a sudden now you're trying to compete with Marriott and Hilton in that select service. What was that like?
Yeah. Well, listen, I really enjoyed working for Marriott. I was there for 3 years. I was in the Newport Beach office. They moved me to Bethesda. But about a year after I moved to Bethesda, Chris Ivey left Marriott and joined Hyatt and was building his development team. And he called me and said, would you cover the Mid-Atlantic to help grow Hyatt Place and then what became Hyatt House? And I thought, how long is it going to take me to get a role like this at Marriott was one thought. And plus, I really enjoyed working with Chris. So I took the leap of faith. And when I was resigning, people at Marriott thought I was absolutely crazy. They said the Pritzkers are just going to spin this business off. Because as you might remember, they owned USFS and Hawthorne Suites, but completely separate. Wasn't part of Hyatt Gold Passport at the time, now World of Hyatt, completely separate. So the word on the street was, the Pritzkers are great, wise investors, but they often spin off businesses. So why would you ruin your chances at Marriott and go to a competitor for what will be a short time? I was like, you know what? I know how to bartend. I wait tables. I'll figure it out. I was still in my 20s at that point. And I took the leap of faith, and I'm glad I did. I learned so much, and I have a lot of love for Marriott. Great people there for sure. Great family business at its core. But yeah, so when I joined Hyatt, there were 270 hotels worldwide. They had 4 or 5 brands.
Wow, that's it. And look at how
Yeah.
much, wow.
They only managed, they didn't franchise. So I was like peddling our wares. I had the deck, the PowerPoint deck, talking about this dream of Hyatt Place because everything was AmeriSuite still at the time. But it was the greatest learning experience, I think, of my career so far.
I can imagine. Yeah. I don't know if you know this, but before I was at Interstate, I worked for Mitt Shaw at Noble Investment Group. And when I was at Noble, I was there during the great financial crisis, and they had done I think the first portfolio with Walton Street Capital of the franchise, because we managed them. They were all the original AmeriSuites. We had 16 of them. We called it the 16 pack. And it was Walton Street Capital and Noble. And this is circa like 2007, 2008, I think. And it was really interesting to see that brand come to
Yeah.
life. And now you think there's Hyatt Places everywhere, but that wasn't the case.
That wasn't the case. It was very much a suburban model at the time. We really focused on urban development. Noble Investment was an early franchisee. OTO, God rest, Corey Oak's soul. He's such a great person. They were one of the original franchisees. They did some of the urban development as well. So there really were some heavy hitters who created the base of franchisees who exist today still.
And then you leave, you went to IHG, I think, right before COVID, and you launched Voco, Vignette Collection, I think, also trying to expand Kimpton. What did you learn during those kind of 6 years there at IHG, and maybe some good lessons in that Chief Development Officer of the Americas role?
I didn't really want to leave Hyatt, but there wasn't another role for me. There wasn't a head of Americas, there wasn't a chief development officer role any longer. And I felt like I had more to learn on the development side. And I had been counseled at Hyatt, do you want to get into ops? Where can we help you grow? Do you want to move internationally? And none of that sounded interesting to me at the time. I do wish I had worked internationally when my kids were young, or maybe before kids, but at that point in my life, it really wasn't something I wanted to do. So, a recruiter called, said Joel Eisman is going to be retiring at some point, or he's not retired because he's with Noble, but he'll be moving on, and we'd love to consider you. And initially I thought, I love Chicago. Who wants to live in Atlanta? My brother lived in Atlanta. He went to Georgia Tech also. And I thought, I don't know. Yeah, and I just didn't have a great impression of Atlanta, but we well played. Joel flew my family and I down in February to do a tour, and the kids were like, "This is great!" Wearing T-shirts, running around. No polar vortex in sight. And it was just a tremendous growth opportunity for me. And I learned so much from Joel. His approach is just best in class. He should teach, I think. I'm not sure if that's in the cards for him, but he's very good,
Oh, if
very
you're listening
methodical.
in, Professor Joel.
Professor Joel, I mean, he already is kind of a professor to many, lots of advice. He's someone I still consider a mentor today. But what I really learned was how to manage volume. I mean, last year, the team I oversaw signed somewhere around 1,000 transactions from new development, change of ownerships, relicensings. It's just a machine, right? They've been franchising since the 1950s. So just learning how to manage scale, volume, build your team around that was a huge learning lesson. And just that rigor that Joel instilled on me and the rest of the team, who've all moved on. Not all, many are still at IHG, still great people there, but many of whom have moved on to do great things.
And now you're back at Hyatt. Did it feel like a homecoming a bit?
Yes, I stayed close with many people at Hyatt. This is such a relationship business, right? You have the same experience. Even when you're competitors, you're still friends. And we stayed close. Many more brands, a few companies were acquired while I was gone. So it is very much a different company, but the DNA is still there, and many of the the pillars of the company are still there as well. So definitely a homecoming. Feels like I'm kind of back home, which I'm super excited about the next generation of the company.
Well, the growth has been exceptional, very impressive. I think Mark has done a phenomenal job. Well, why don't we talk about Hyatt a bit? I'd love to get into the numbers some. So I pulled some numbers. Hyatt had the highest number of US signings in 5 years last year, up 30% year over year, 50% of the deals in new markets. And you really, in the US, supply growth is anemic, but you guys are growing. And now some of that may be conversions and things like that. But what is driving that?
Yeah, I'll start with our base, which is a full service, group oriented, urban distributed portfolio. Then we got into Hyatt Place and Hyatt House. We were able to grow in suburban markets, fill in urban markets, and have more presence. Where we weren't historically were smaller secondary markets and tertiary markets. But we had a guest demand there. If we do lose our World of Hyatt members to a competitor, it's because we don't have product. So that caused us to think, what can we launch? What should we be thinking about that's meaningful and accretive to our portfolio and to our guests? And there's two brands. One is Hyatt Select, which is a conversion-oriented offering, but can make sense in secondary markets, tertiary markets as well. Most of our growth from Select in the last year are from non-Hyatt branded hotels, so they're accretive to our pipeline. But some are Hyatt Place hotels that are in markets where the market has shifted, can't quite reach the ADR in that market that's important for Hyatt Place. The cost of renovation doesn't make sense. So now we have a place for those hotels to go. But most of the growth is still from outside of Hyatt. Then we created and launched Hyatt Studios. That's a big piece of our growth as well. And what I love about that is Mark brought on Dan Hansen, who was the CEO of Summit, and he incubated this Hyatt Studios brand in collaboration with owners and developers who build in that space. So that is the brand that owners have built, which is so meaningful to me because as a brand company, we create things that we think are accretive to the development community, and sometimes we miss the mark. So it's so important to get that owner feedback to make the brand make sense to them, and then in turn, overlay our consumer insights to make sure that that's meaningful for them too. But as I think about Studios and Select, like who's that Hyatt traveler? It's me, right? I love the Thompson brand. That's where I go when I travel. When I'm with my family, I'm at the big Grand Hyatts. But my daughter plays volleyball, and when we travel around, I stay at competitors because there's no Hyatt offering. So Hyatt Studios, Hyatt Select, I'll be staying there with my daughter's traveling team.
Yeah, that's well said. I'm a globalist with Hyatt.
Thank you.
And so it's the same thing when my wife and I travel internationally, we often stay at Hyatt properties. or even domestically. But you're right, when you go to a secondary market. And here's a kind of reframe to this point. I've always thought of Hyatt as best in class food and beverage, best in class when it comes to lifestyle, even now getting into luxury. How do you grow Hyatt Studios, Hyatt Select aggressively in that kind of essentials brand category, while not diluting the fact that I think a lot of people like me as a globalist think about you as like this full service, best in class, you're known for that. And then all of a sudden you're growing in the essentials. How do you prevent losing that kind of cachet, right?
I would say with really tight brand standards and guidelines and stringent requirements of our owners and developers. And that starts with the team of people who are selling brands to owners and developers and making sure that they fully understand the World of Hyatt ecosystem, and are mindful of who our guest is. And early in my career, it's actually Jim Chu, who's at Hyatt, said to me, we were talking to this owner. He was possibly not a great fit culturally for Hyatt. And Jim said to me, we're going to be married to this person for 20 years. So after you're done with this deal, you're handing him over to operate. Is this someone we want to be married to for 20 years? I've always kept that in mind as we're growing a company, because you have to grow mindfully, and Hyatt is so focused on that. And that starts with the fact that we were a full service hotel company, managed all of our properties, owned a lot of them. We still own some stuff. We went public more recently in 2009. So we have that DNA of we're owners and we want to be partners with our owners in that sense of being like-minded and operate with excellence. Do we get it right 100% of the time? No, but we really try hard to have all the right checks and balances in place.
Yeah, I've often said that I think strategy is about sacrifice. You can't be all things to all people. And I really respect your CEO, Mark, a lot. We don't know each other super well, but I know he has said that Hyatt, and I'm quoting him, is about intentional growth and not just chasing nug growth for the sake of nug. I think sometimes on these earnings calls, it's just like the analysts get over focused on, is your nug growth, your net unit growth 6-7%. And, if that's all the focus is, you do kind of lose some of that discipline. I will say, I think Marriott and Hilton are exceptional companies, and I think Hyatt is too. Stock prices reflect that. But it does seem like you guys have shown discipline. If I pivot, how are you thinking about the brands that you take on? Which ones are the brands that you think have some good runway as you take over the role and where you're really excited about?
Last year, Mark structured the company around being brand led, which means we have now 5 really strong pillars or groupings of brands. So we've got Hyatt Inclusive Club, and that is where Apple Leisure, Playa, and then the existing all-inclusive brands that we had with Ziva and Zilara fall in that bucket. And that's been a tremendous growth opportunity for us as we expand in the Caribbean markets. And that's led...
You guys have the most in that space now, at least in the inclusive collection for sure, right?
We do, and that's led by a gentleman named Javier, and we really feel like that is a tremendous growth vehicle for us. Now, that's not going to be everywhere, right? Because that's all-inclusive has a specific place and a specific consumer. The other 4 pillars, which I'm responsible for, are classics, essentials, lifestyle, and luxury. And I'll focus on 2 of those pillars to answer your question. One is lifestyle. We still have a number of institutional owners who see the long-term benefit of that segment. The experiential traveler is really looking for that F&B experience, that differentiated experience, and we sort of win in that category. And then on the essential side, our growth opportunity is in these smaller markets where we still have World of Hyatt members traveling, and that's reflected in Hyatt Studios and Hyatt Select. So I think all of our brands have growth opportunity because we're undersaturated in literally every single market that you can think of relative to our competitors. So our ability to really scale and grow is tremendous.
Yeah, and I think that serves you guys well, particularly for the next decade, because if you look at Marriott and Hilton, at least domestically, they're pretty saturated. The numbers are the numbers. Even in top 25 markets, you tend to have less product. What I have to ask is, I ask this to all the brands that come on, at what point are there too many brands? And I say that because I do think there is some customer confusion.
I think we've evolved as consumers to being attracted to the brand.com, right? So in our case, Hyatt.com, and being able to book hotels through that ecosystem and making sure that we've got a place to stay for all of our reasons for travel and keeping that customer engaged. I think that's the focus versus 20 years ago, that really wasn't the focus. It was about individual brands. Now it's really about that parent company and that brand.com. I would say that in terms of individual brands, we still have brand enthusiasts, people who love the Thompson brand, people who love the Hyatt Place brand. What our work is, which we embarked upon last year, is making sure those brands are strong in and of itself, right? They commercially perform, but they also don't overlap with one another. One of the risks of having just a few brands is you might flex one up, flex one down, whatever, and then all of a sudden there's these blurred lines. When you have as many brands as we do feel like there are really strict guidelines that we can put into place and guide owners to the right brand selection versus trying to morph something that really veers away from what that brand means.
Thinking about the industry, maybe we pivot to a conversation about the industry and particularly the United States. I recently had on my good friend Ryan Melliker. He heads up Lark. They put out their prognostication every year, just like Smith Travel and just like CBRE. And we talked on that episode a lot about a bifurcated consumer in the United States. We have kind of a K-shaped economy. You know, the top 10, 20% of Americans who own most of the stock market, who are business owners, who stay in lifestyle and luxury hotels, are feeling still pretty good about life. Inflation hasn't hurt them. They actually have assets, so inflation may have benefited them. And then you have, the other 80% of America, often living paycheck to paycheck, your economy, mid-scale customer, who are really struggling. Hyatt, you skew more upscale luxury, or historically have, so that benefits you. How are you thinking about that as you take on this new role, in that we do seem to be living in a more bifurcated world?
Well, first, it's another reason why we should have an affordable offering, which we've done with Select and Studios, because if you look at consumer behavior, even those who are reportedly struggling still prioritize family trips and travel and experiences together. The Great American Road Trip came back through the pandemic and hasn't gone away. There's still many people who prioritize travel through their cars versus getting on an airplane. Although travel inbound or in the US from an air travel standpoint is also at an all-time high. So having that offering, I think, is important for that demographic who's more price sensitive. And then on the luxury and lifestyle side, I mean, we saw through the pandemic that was one of the winners, right? It was the extended stay, really catering towards the traveling nurse and electrician and so forth. And then it was luxury and lifestyle and the upper tier of that lifestyle brand, because the wealthy individuals who control the stock market, who aren't as affected, are still traveling and also prioritize experience. So experiences have no socioeconomic barrier, right? People want experiences with their families. So the fact that we're able to provide that in an upper mid-scale segment is pretty exciting.
I'm sticking with kind of general economy themes. On that same episode with Ryan, we talked about the transaction market in hotel transaction market specifically, and how bid-ask spreads are still pretty wide. You had a pretty anemic transaction volume year last year. Cap rates are drifting toward 10%, so they're kind of rising. And, it feels like sellers are still anchored to like a 2022 valuation. How do you think that plays into, you guys are having all this success. I would say that's not widely true for the U.S. You still have a lot of depressed values. Interest rates are still staying a bit high. Cost of construction is still a challenge. How are you thinking about those challenges?
We're one of the few businesses that offer a cash flowing business and real estate investment. That's unique for us, right? You look at quick service restaurants and some of those, many of those are lease models. So the fact that we get to have a real estate investment that appreciates and a cash flowing business is pretty compelling. I was talking to one of our owners who owns gas stations, and gas stations margins are incredible, right? So I said, why are you developing hotels? And he said, because of the tax implications I have on the gas stations, the hotels help me offset that, and then I actually get money back versus owing money, which I thought was a really interesting way of looking at it.
I thought about it that way, yeah.
So that allows him to balance his portfolio. And I made a remark. I said, "Oh, in case there's a downturn in gas stations." He's like, "There's no downturn in gas stations." Okay, so, okay, great.
They're like liquor stores. They're recession proof.
But essentially, he's saying he's making too much money. He's got to put it into hotels. But he loves the real estate side of it, and he's become a deal junkie. And he's now owning hotels all over the country, and has operating partners to help him do that. So what does a brand do like Hyatt to be responsible towards our owners? One is, I can't talk enough about commercial performance and how important that is, and constantly being creative, now being able to use AI in different ways to just make sure that we're allowing the flow through to be as generous as possible with all the levers we have to pull, all the abilities to negotiate with providers and so forth. So that's something you can never take your foot off that gas pedal. That's really our responsibility. And then secondly, yes, we are more creative, I would say, than the others with our balance sheet. We're still investors. We still look at pref equity deals and things like that. If we can get a return on our investment versus just writing a check, that's great. We are working with Bridge, and that's a company that is providing loan opportunities to Hyatt Studios. They're lending on their own balance sheet at a preferred interest rate, and they're also syndicating. They're a broker as well to find lending for the conversion opportunities. So we continue to talk to groups like that to help take the pressure off of especially the owners who don't have the gravitas like a Noble does. They have one or two hotels. They don't necessarily have the connections. So making the connections for them. And then continuing to refine our prototypes, make sure that they're cost efficient, taking square footage out. We've been doing that for years, but continuing to look at that so that we're as efficient as possible.
Besides this wave of brands and growing them organically, where do you think other growth happens for Hyatt? Yeah, I've been seeing a lot of adjacency partnerships, right?
Two recent examples for us is we partnered with Under Canvas, and that's now part of World of Hyatt. So not an acquisition, just a partnership, but that helps us leverage World of Hyatt. And then we did purchase Mr. and Mrs. Smith, which is a booking platform for luxury stays, usually around the 30 to 60 room property in markets that don't have meeting demand or corporate demand. It's really a leisure play. And that's brought several hundred hotels to our system. And there's a link to World of Hyatt there, so you can earn and burn through Mr. and Mrs. Smith. And we bought that platform rather than partner with them.
Makes sense. As you look out to the next couple of years, what excites you the most about your new role?
Well, first and foremost, I'm really about people, and I love building teams. And we've got tremendous people at Hyatt, some of whom I worked with previously, some of whom are new. We're going to continue to grow on that side. I'm excited to strengthen Hyatt. We're a newer franchisor, right? So all of our systems and mechanisms to strengthen ourselves are still in flight, and I love being a part of that. But it's really about the people. I love helping people grow their careers and grow into leaders themselves.
Yeah, maybe we transition there to a bit of how do I get that job?
Yeah.
I mean, you started off in that part-time program at Marriott, right? For the folks listening in and they say, hey, I want to get into development, or, I want to have a career path like you, what would be kind of the advice, where to start?
I would say first, it's not about I, it's about we, right? And when I had my first role at Marriott, I raised my hand to do all kinds of projects. We had, at the time, they were called Uniform Franchise Offering Circulars, and you'd print it out as a book of 160 something pages, and you'd FedEx them to prospective clients. I was at the copier printing out those UFOCs for days on end and mailing them out because there was a need. So really, in the early days, I raised my hand often for special projects. How can I help? I also had really great mentors who encouraged me to talk to senior executives, to get to know them, to let them know me and what my skill set was and how I might be able to help. So I think that's first and foremost. At that time, moving was really important. It seems that moving is not as important. You can kind of do jobs remotely. But I very much was in the office, in meetings. People would pull me in. If there was a job opportunity, I'd move. I moved 9 times in my career. So just being open to exploring And no job is a dumb job, right? Especially if it gets you a seat at the table or gets you in the room, I think is an important piece.
You also have, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up, you're also a co-owner of Clean Juice
Yeah.
franchise. So you're actually a franchisee yourself. How has that changed your perspective now that you're, growing and selling franchises for Hyatt? How did that inform being the head of growth for Hyatt and then CDO at IHG? Did you learn some stuff from being an actual franchisee?
So much. And let me tell you, this store we have is 1,200 square feet.
Yeah.
Um, and the
And it's in
amount of
Atlanta,
work,
your location in Atlanta? Is that where
it's in Brookhaven.
I said,
So,
oh, okay, cool.
yep, really great spot. Mixed use development. We got in early, really great lease terms, and built from the ground up. But the amount of work this little 1,200 square foot store took between the city approvals, the county approvals, the watershed. I didn't know there's a watershed approval. Like, I learned so much.
I don't even know what a watershed approval is.
Yeah, it has to do with the grease trap. And if you put in the wrong size, you have to redo the grease trap. So
Got
that's
it.
a whole other story.
Interesting.
And why you need a grease trap for a smoothie and juice shop is a whole other thing. But so that the amount of work that it must take for a developer to build a Park Hyatt, a Hyatt Studios, I'm so in awe of that and humbled after just building my little store. And then also the value of listening to the field and the operators and what they're going through versus making boardroom decisions. I knew that already because of my interactions with the ownership community my whole career, but man, has that been solidified. My husband's the primary operator and he's constantly raising his hand. Why don't we do this? Why don't we do that? And it's an interesting exchange being a franchisee. So forever respect our ownership community.
I
Even
bet.
more.
What it reminds me of listening to you is, I really very much believe this. I think being a parent has a lot of translation to the workplace and bringing empathy in a way that builds rapport. And I've shared many a time that being a father of four now with my young daughter, while you still drive accountability, you just get there in a different way. And then, being a parent and seeing the struggles and realizing people have lives outside of work, it brings this natural empathy into the workplace that I think enhances it. Sounds like being a franchisee has done that for you too.
Yeah, and on the parenting side too, I've learned with my two children that there's not a one size fits all management or leadership style either. Individuals are individuals, and what motivates one person is demotivates another, right? And having to navigate that as a leader has certainly parenting has taught me a lot about that too.
Yeah, we could probably do an entire podcast of parent to business translation. We'll have to
Absolutely.
set that up in the future. If I'm an owner listening into this and I'm not familiar with Hyatt, maybe I'm a Marriott or Hilton or an IHG franchisee, you're the new head of growth. What is the single strongest reason you can think of to say to that owner why to pick Hyatt for their next project?
We have a tremendously strong platform already through World of Hyatt and the brand equity we've created over the last 70 years. We want our owners to build more than just one hotel with us and grow with us over time and generationally. And we're very undersaturated in markets. So our ability to grow and allow owners to sort of enjoy a nice ramp up is an important piece of our growth as well.
I know we're coming to the last quarter hour of the hour, and I love to always kind of jump into what I call rapid fire. No right or wrong answer. I'll throw you a easy one first. Best career advice you've ever gotten?
Be yourself. That was an important piece for me to hear very early in my career. I kind of never noticed I was the only woman in the room. I've got a brother who I'm very close with. I had lots of friends who were boys growing up, but it would be pointed out to me from time to time that I was the only woman in the room, and I got a little self-conscious about that at one point. And somebody said, just be yourself. There's only one you, and if you're not yourself, these owners, these investors, these high-powered individuals are going to see right through you. So just be yourself.
So Hyatt, fast forward 5 years from now, how many properties globally do you guys have?
I think that's a forward-looking statement, Sloan.
Oh, okay. Well,
I would say.
okay,
I will answer it a different way. I'll tell you this. We have 1,500 hotels open worldwide, and we have almost 800 hotels in our pipeline. So do the math on that.
Well, then the 2000s easy.
Exactly. Yes. So we already have a path for that.
Now, I was going to put you on the spot and say, what is the best market in America to develop in right now? But rather than that, what are some of the top markets from development opportunity that you see in the United States today?
It depends on what day you catch me on. And today you're catching me on a day where I've been talking a lot about Mexico. We're fairly
Okay.
underpenetrated in Mexico. We just opened a standard in Mexico City, or about to open a standard in Mexico City, which is going to be awesome. But we have very little select service and upper mid-scale product there. So I think Mexico is one to look out for from us. It's one of my favorite, and many of the tech companies have nearshored. Many of the U.S. tech companies have nearshored their talent in Mexico City and Guadalajara and some of the other cities in Mexico, and it's a great quality of life. Mexico City is one of the best cities, I would say, globally for arts, entertainment, food. I'm a big fan.
Any market that stands out where you think, okay, maybe it's a little saturated?
I gotta plead the fifth on that one. Our
Yeah.
markets, no, I would say there have been some real rapid growth in the southeast. It seems to continue to absorb though, so it'll be interesting to see. But I do tend to be more cautious maybe than you might think in the role that I'm in, because you don't want an owner to not perform, right?
Totally.
So yeah, but I would say the Southeast, with all the influx of movement from people from the Northeast, California, Boise, Idaho is another market where there's been so many West Coast people moving there. Be interesting to see if the development that's happening there continues to be absorbed, but seems to be okay so far.
Yeah, I'm curious to see. There's a ton of development here in the greater Dallas area where it's home for me. I think it's actually the number one supply growth now that you've had a cool down in Austin and Nashville
Yeah.
bit. And I'm always curious if like the city, I mean, so far the city continues to absorb, although our convention center is going offline for a period of time. But Dallas seems like one of those where it's been booming, but there's a ton of new supply too. So it's always a curious question how there's tons of demand generation expansion, but at the same time, can it continue to absorb?
Yeah.
How are you in your role thinking about AI and your perspective on AI?
It's tremendous for market planning, first of all. How I personally use it is if I have a number of presentations or decks that I need to digest and get a summary from, I dump it into the Hyatt protected AI portal, and the summaries I get are tremendous. Now you have to give AI some prompts. One of the
Right.
prompts is don't make stuff up. Did you know that? You have to tell it
Yeah,
not to
yeah,
make
you got to tell it.
up.
Yeah.
I know.
Don't hallucinate.
Exactly. Don't hallucinate. Don't make stuff up. And I'll have to tweak things, but man, it takes work off. I know for attorney work, if you want to look through a signed franchise agreement or a signed HMA and get some of the bullet points that you're trying to look for, you can plug in your agreement, and in 15 minutes, it'll give you a summary and say, in section 2.1, I found this. That takes hours of work off. So the way I look at it is it's not replacing anybody's roles. It's making people much more efficient and focus on what's important.
Yeah, I think that's well said. At some point, we may be looking at job replacement, but I think it's all about productivity and efficiency gains right now. I have a funny story on the hallucinations. When I started my garden leave last summer, I started this newsletter and podcast in simultaneous fashion. So I do a weekly newsletter. I was doing research on AI and like companies that are doing progressive things in AI, and I didn't prompt it to not hallucinate. Well, it created the 3 or 4 cases, and one was around Taiwan and how it's got this biometric check-in in immigration and using AI. It completely falsified it. I didn't know. It actually gave me a URL that it created that was fake. And I almost sent it to my newsletter. And thank God I was doing some link checking and I couldn't believe it. It wrote it in such a firm way that you were like, oh man, this is so cool. I hadn't heard about it. It made it all up and gave false links.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely have to do the fact checking. And it's kind of crazy. Maybe this is an AI interview. Maybe this isn't really Sloan D and Julienne Smith. I don't know. I should probably fact check, right? I mean, it's pretty incredible.
I asked this to every guest, favorite hotel.
When my kids were little, we took a trip to Scottsdale and we stayed at Hyatt Gainey Ranch. And at the time, I think it was Hyatt owned, definitely Hyatt managed. And my kids were like 3.5 and 6 months old. And we get to the hotel and they're falling over themselves, greeting us. They upgraded us to a suite. Someone arrived with a basket of like stuffed animals and cookies, and every day there was another like delight. And my daughter was just thrilled. She still has a stuffed animal, actually. She's 17 now. That was in that basket. And I remember the next trip, we were on a road trip and we were staying at some, no-name roadside motel. And my daughter goes, "Where's the other room? Where's the lady with the basket?" Like just that impression of that trip. And, Gainey Ranch is awesome. They had a hawk expert, and they did a native dance, and it was just such a great experience. Unfortunately, it set the tone with our kids because they're pretty accustomed to some nice experiences. But I would say that, and it wasn't just because we were with Hyatt, because I was working with Hyatt at the time. They treated everybody that way. Like just that spirit of hospitality and being so excited when little kids are on property. They have that Hyatt camp and all that. I would say that experience stands out as probably the best.
So you serve on the Dean's Advisory Board at Boston University at the School of Hospitality. What do you tell kids when they ask you, "Hey, I want to get into development"? Yeah, it's an amazing school. By the way, that's where my wife went to school. My wife went to BU Hospitality School, but
Oh, that's awesome.
little plug for Pam. So we know the university quite well, but
Yeah.
what is the advice you give when you're on campus?
First of all, it's a tremendous hospitality school. I wasn't lucky enough to go to it. I went to a College of Arts and Sciences, but BU is awesome. It's an urban college, which was a great experience for me. I would say networking is so important, like meaningful networking. Bring up a topic, "Oh, I watched your podcast or listened to your podcast, Sloan, and heard so-and-so." Have a reason for connection. Do a little research on that person as well. And then there's so many hospitality companies. Brands always have internships. They've got entry-level positions, but the ownership groups do, the brokerage firms. And I think young people today are really wanting, again, great experiences. So where they live has become even more important than what they're doing. So find a place you want to live and then research what companies are there. The question I always ask first, though, is what do you like and what makes you come alive? Because some people will say to me, "Oh, I want to be in development." And I'll say, "Well, do you like talking to people? Do you like, negotiating? Do you love traveling? You have to like those core things in order to really want that to be your career. And if you don't like those core things, then the career is going to be exhausting. And that's very telling. Like, are you energized at the end of the day, or are you exhausted?"
Yeah, I agree 100%. People have asked me for career advice, and I've always said, you can be any personality type. You can be an extrovert or an introvert and be very successful in just about everything. But it does make it a bit easier, at least I felt, being CEO of a hospitality company, that I was so extroverted that I would go to business dinners all the time and it wasn't work. Like I didn't, but
Yeah,
if that is, it's just going to take more energy out of you. You just need to know that.
that's
That would
right.
be my advice to folks. Like, hey, if you want to be CEO of a hotel company, there's a lot of extroversion things you have to do, and just know that.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so, anyways, I that's great advice. Well, we've come to the time of the show to close this out. Thank you for being here. It's a great conversation. Julian, what are you not done with?
I'm not done with my career. I'm on the back nine, I think. So I'm really excited about continuing on with my owner relations focus, my growth focus, being back at Hyatt. I hope I get to be here another 14 years like I was before. And I'm super excited. And thank you, Sloan, for inviting me to participate in this. I love that you're doing this podcast. I've watched your career over the years and what you've done, and the important role that you play in this industry is awesome to watch.
Well, same, my friend. I am excited to have you back in a couple of years. I'll look for you in New York in June, and thanks for being here.
Sounds great. Thanks, Sloan.